Here's another one that's going to show some connections to dragons, which I've done quite a few of recently. And sometimes I feel like whenever I do this, I start to get to the point that I've got you full of information and you don't want any more. And I could even bring out something as interesting as cheesecake and you'd probably deny it. And in fact, you might even start inside yourself trying to deny that you even like cheesecake or things like that at that moment. Whereas if we gave it a while, you'd probably go with a cheesecake. So I've tried to do this in a way that shows layers, if you will. Layers of an onion, I quite often refer to it, or like a jawbreaker when you're a kid and it goes through colors and so on, to where you get different ideas, or maybe the way the Egyptians are buried, where it's a box inside a box inside a box, and then he's wrapped up and down, you know. So in this here, I want to talk about a concept. So it's a little different than some of the ways that we go, but I'm going to make huge connections along the way. And of course, it has to do with dragons again. And, you know, you might wonder why there's all these things about dragons. Well, some people don't realize that the cosmos was the TV of ancient times, and these people that were intelligent were using such to try to figure out how we all got here. And it was the primordial lead into science. And at one time, science, magic, and religion were always intertwined with each other. In a modern day, you could probably find out that, well, that's not the way it works at all, but it did so in ancient times. And I've made the connection before that the Greeks and a lot of their tales are not from a little mountain area right over here where all these 12 gods that they have under Zeus and all that, or 11 others, and what that has to do with. And I've made a few allusions to the fact that, hey, there's a lot of Greek hand in the Bible and just twists of stories that they've had there. And so we've seen that. But where did they get it from? Well, I've made a few videos recently, and I'd like for you to look them up, but I show where Adonis and other mythologies are taken from Sumerian tales that went from long before. And then people were wondering about that, of course, and so I came out with a series showing you Written in the Stars on how this basically breaks down and how it really started out and the way that this kind of works. And I surely didn't want to show y'all all this Written in the Stars things at first, because you'd start to have an idea that maybe this is where all this BS comes from. And therefore you wouldn't know all the esoteric things that have to do with other ideas. And it also, though, makes it easier for connection whenever I talk about how much of it is actually connected to astrotheology, where you've got the zodiac going on at nighttime, and during the day, sun is doing certain things, and the sun and the moon are in interaction with each other. And when the sun comes out, he's the only one, well, other than the adversary, that they get into fights every once in a while and cause an eclipse. But in that endeavor, you can find metaphors constantly through the Old and New Testament, and you find it in all these other cultures that are around. I mean, I talk about often how I didn't try to go against the Bible at first. I was going with all these other people's stories, mythologies, and everything, and then I was kind of taught on an idea of what that mythology was kind of like, and this story that's in the Tale of Troy here and everything, what that kind of went along with. And then there's this other idea, and of course, I saw the movies when I was a kid, A Clash of the Titans, and they show how they're written out of the constellations, and these things are all set up like the gods put the stars there so you could always remember these tales. And that was a reality of the way people thought in ancient times. But to look at this concept I'm trying to show you, I have to give you a little blend of that idea and where the Greeks got a lot of their ideas from. And where does this come from? Because there are connections that go back way before recorded time. It literally goes into the last ice age and drifts off in a mist. And we've been able to see a few things, and I don't have it pulled up right here now to show you, but there's a few cave paintings that show this weird creature, and it's not just anamorphic, which you can find a dozen of those, but this thing that kind of looks like a dragon idea. And then there are times whenever they put the cow in the place of the dragon, and it seems like before about 17,000 BC, the cow was in the place of the dragon, let's say. And I made a series off of another guy's work and then adding to it like I quite often do 2 years ago, and it was a Christmas special where I try to come out with something cool like a gift and a super layer of an onion and super connective video. And he talks about how the Milky Way comes about and so, and it's how it's hooked up with the stars, and that even in his work, what he finds the easiest connection that you would understand is, and ancient Egyptians had the same thing in the Apis bull and this, that, and the other. When they die, they go up into the stars and do the same type of thing that the ancient Celts were doing. And that's the reason that Stonehenge and all of these sites and certain ones around that river system, which actually means white cow, in the River Boyne area. So connection, and we still call it the Milky Way today for a reason. But does anybody know that in the ancient of times, this Ouroboros, which to you mentally looks like a snake wrapping up in a ring and then biting its own tail, was actually a giant demon serpent, and because of attributes, it became a creature that you're looking at today, whether you think of a single dragon or a multi-headed. And I'll get into that too, because that's just a different picture of the dragon again, and here he is doing this, or she, which Tiamat is looked at as a she. And there was a Bahamut too that went before that. And because we're talking about the primordial gods that started everything, this is like the Titans and things of old and what started it off. And if you'll look, the Titans are all these monsters that have all these different attributes, and the hectocanaries and all these other weird things that you can find are actually taken out of Sumerian mythology, blended with crap they had going on, making a mythological idea of something that's mimicking and mocking the Sumerian idea of all monsters coming from this primordial creature. There's another Greek tale that shows that Persephone, Pandora, and she unleashed all of these bad things, and all that was left was hope. And that's another idea out of it, and she's a woman in that idea. And in a lot of the mythologies here, Tiamat is not this dragon that you see in front of you, but she's actually a woman. And that harkens back to magic too, where this wizard is so powerful it can turn itself into this creature, like when a vampire acts or whatever else you want, and give it size, but then she's the greatest of all. And so whenever there's constellations that are about this big in the sky, and then you think of the whole Milky Way, and you can't see the end of her tail, and you can't see her head, because it's going around. And when she comes around and up, her gaze, much like the gaze in the Lord of the Rings idea, like the sun, blots out everything else. And you don't see all those speckles and stars and the stories that are written in the heavens at night, but you get to go do it again and visit again. Irregardless of that fact, what we're looking at is a conglomeration, and this is the Hydra. And there are tales that'll blend those together, and I could go through the minutiae of showing each one to you. But the Sumerians had this way before, and in their idea, they had it going way before. And in fact, The flood was something that just ruined Samaria, and they had already been going on for a long time, whereas in the Bible idea, it's made to somehow look like they popped up and then one guy got kicked out and he created a city, which doesn't involve one person and his family, but anyhow, we get a different idea. But even in the Bible, they tell you those first cities and where they are in Sumerian and everything, and it makes connections that really, if we didn't have our modern knowledge of this, which really comes about in the 40s and 50s, and finding that this place existed in Babylon the Great, and actually it goes way back to this other thing that comes before, and hey, these tablets here are telling you that same story. And they tell about a raven and a dove and da-da-da, and it just fits right along with it. The only problem is it's a local flood and it's not all of the world. Well, I've made other videos where that belief becomes, because you can get on the top of Everest and all kinds of places and find fish fossils from whenever that used to be part of under the ocean. And people trying to come up with an idea and an ideal that pushed this idea that something happened recently and da-da-da, it's all going to end soon, wasn't really the truth that we know today. But there's a lot of people that tried to get people to believe this, like the world was flat and all kinds of different things that we can look back through these people, and even the Sumerians knew it was round. Descriptions of things, and I may make this series talk that I'll actually show you revelations and Proto-Indo-European linguistics and where a lot of these concepts and names that are driven. And you could say, oh, that's a loan word. And it's like, well, if I show it to you 50 times, would you think that it has a lot more to do than just a loan word? Let's get into this here, though, because she is the creator of the first generation of deities in Mesopotamian mythology, all up the Tigris and Euphrates. In fact, we're actually living on her dead body. Oh, it sounds weird, doesn't it? But there's a conflagration going on here on a mythology on the way things work. And so we ought to look into that so we can get a good idea of the way this really works. But Tiamat here makes up an actual circle of life. And whenever we look at things with these ancient people, they realized that there was saltwater fish and freshwater fish, and of course it's real prominent. They're on a river system that works off the seasons and the whole 9 yards. In doing so, they realized, there was a concept called brackish, where you'll only find certain fish right where it meets the delta, but then the abyss of the big sea, like we're looking at here, that can go on forever, has different creatures, and if you take and try to put them in this type of water, the non-bitter waters, that they would die. And so there are things that are this way and things that are that way, and that ocean had somehow brought about life, and that what we're looking at is the remnant of it. Now, if you think about it in a certain way, this is actually a mythological woo-woo way of looking at science and the way it actually works. And we kind of understand it in that way, but now we look at it in a full scientific mode. But peel back thousands of years and the way these people had a concept of it going on, it's fantastic. And they knew that the world was round because they talk about the underworld and how it all went round and back up, and the stars are just like our sun, but like in a torch in the distance, far, far away. And then we now look into their maths and we can figure out they kind of knew how far, far away a lot of things were too. And it's weird how in a modern day you'd think, we finally figured it out now, and then you get into their stuff and you go, oh, they were all about it. They have this incredible trigonometry, math, and things like that. I'll do a video on what Nibiru actually has to connect to and things to it. Really has something to do with what we're talking about and stories that came out of this concept, because out of all of this, there's a lot of monsters. Well, whenever you start traveling out on the ocean and stuff, it's not lollygagging. You can just try to go out and swim, and all of a sudden sharks show up, things like this, and you don't know what the hell they are. So you make up all kinds of things about it. In fact, that's where Cancer the crab comes from, because he was originally like Scorpio. He really has three, that magic number, but he was originally like Scorpio, and before that, he was actually a bird. But then there's Aquila over here too, which is aquiline, which means a common Caucasian nasal form or whatever, but in that same way, it really means eagle-headed. And I don't know, look at George Washington, and you go, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. He's almost like a bald eagle. All right, get it. So lots of connections, but we're peering back through thousands of years, and I'm talking about before there was writing. There are a lot of people that make connections that this one tale right here shows up, and it's around this certain time, so that's where they come up with the story. And it's like, no, that was a rewriting of another story, and they've got another one too, and then one about Dilmun, and it's almost like Eden, where there's no creatures on it that are aggressive at all, and everything just runs around happily lollygagging with each other. But then Inky eats all these weird plants, and then whenever she tries to fix him, Lady of the Rib shows up, and that's something twisted in the idea of our idea of Adam and Eve and the way things happened, and Adamu and all these other connections that I really don't want to go into. In fact, I'm just blurring this concept as I talk about them. So let's look at this. Saltwater meets freshwater means there's active creation. And in fact, what they're looking at here is the fact that things can't pass this barrier situation, but yet that barrier spawned both. And we kind of have an understanding of that idea too. And of course, you can imagine people seeing dinosaur bones and things like that would end up coming up with, man, here's all these monsters. Monster, 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 monster. Let's get into this more. So the ocean's known to have just all kinds of life in it. And the more they look, the more they look. And they started taking hooks and throwing it down and pulling up live corals and things like that. And there'd be shrimp in it and all kinds of creatures. And they're just like, oh, wow. You know, whenever I was a kid, I was enamored with the same situation. It's like, you know, the ocean is a blanket of blue, and then below it, there's a whole different world. And it's an underworld too. And as above, so below, and things like that. But so let's get back into this. The things that Tiamat creates are 11 creatures, and that shows itself up a whole lot more. In most of these stories, of course, the one makes the 12 in it, and we understand that whenever you do have the full 12, there was one that's being thrown out now that used to be active, and one wonders why when you find out it's Ophiuchus and this giant serpent with a man attached to it, and how that man and serpent means a bunch of things to these stories in ancient days, but it's like poof, we no longer know it. Just like they changed A from 432 megahertz to 440, and whoopsie, things like that. They go along with sacred geometry and all kinds of things, but in this endeavor, we've lost a little idea. You know, everybody wonders in Revelation, how does this go with this 1/3 of the stars of heaven that fall? Well, it has to do with a few things, and it worked out so good in what people knew from before in folk tales that it worked out, because the Younger Dryas event, there was this big thing that happened with all these meteor strikes. In fact, it keeps happening every year right near Halloween, and it's the broom tales of the witches and all that. And look up my videos on it. And we still go through that, the Day of the Dead and all of this. It seems to attaching back to thousands and thousands of years ago. But in this earliest tale too, and ideas they have in the Sumerians, Bahamut and Tiamat got into a big fight with Kia, and that's what makes the earth. That's Ki, right? And so that's Mother Earth, by the way. That's Mother Nature. That's whatever you want to give for it. That's the planet that'll shrug us off if we keep screwing up, you know, that kind of thing. Well, you'll find that it probably won't shrug us off more than we'll get hit by something by sitting here with our thumb up our ass and not actually paying attention to the stars. But it's not all about the stars, because there's a story woven into it that shows you mythology that using the Sumerians and their zodiacal concepts and all their constellations, which it means used, built out of the stars. And what is it? Well, constellation writing is what the Sumerians actually called a lot of their sacred writing and astrology and all these things. And people talk about how it meant so much. So a lot of Mesopotamian mythology attributes all this to happening, and the reason the cosmos is here and the Milky Way itself and stuff was this giant dragon that had died. And in a way, we're trapped just floating over here in a bubble, like a snow globe. In other tales, it gets wrapped into the idea that it's her rib cage that's holding everything up, and so she must be transparent. Well, she's black, you're inside of it, trapped. And then all those little dots or little holes that came through whenever Marduk had put holes through her. So things evolve in this story and go through, but Venus is Inanna, and of course that's Lucifer, and that's this, that, and the other, and so on. And so you can tell there's a lot of people that have these tales that come from way back when. A lot of people in their mind, they kind of put it parallel. I mean, it's like, okay, this is well known by these people before that, and then they say this, and then later, and then here's your Bible thing. So how does that work out? It gets out of hand, let's say, whenever we start looking at things from that point of view. But these tales came out of people from Mesopotamia and the gods, and they say that the gods are what gifted them with things, that they could meet with the gods and they do this, that, and the other. And it becomes particularly significant whenever you start to find out that all of these things they talk about have constellations that attach to them, like a plow or things like that. So it's all having to do with agriculture, and it really seems that a people that were steeped in an idea of looking at the stars for the way things went blended it with an agricultural type deity, and the fact of the year and the seasons is what makes all them grow. And then that blend is just coming into the first start of the idea that we have here. And then that, of course, has been distilled and refined into a fine whiskey that really you'd like a blend of a few different whiskey flavors and things to end up developing what we kind of still have today as a remnant. And a lot of it, of course, is written in the stars. You don't see these people looking up because this is the day. And Dios, which we know is God, means daytime. So it's whenever he's looking upon the earth with his one single eye, like Odin and so on. And hey, there's ravens in that too in the stories. But this agricultural system would actually live off of the idea that, and no pun intended, seriously, live off the idea of settling around an area that's controlled by a river that, due to the way it floods and spring showers bring May flowers, April, and how that works out, that these people would live off of this. And of course, everybody thinks, oh, they quit hunter-gathering. No. I mean, they were still hunter-gathering and doing stuff, but they were creating the civilization that we have today. And then in another concept attached to that, you think everybody gave that away, but I mean, Ma and Pa and Little House on the Prairie and all that, Pa would go out hunting and things like that, and over above, I mean, he had a few cattle, and they had a garden going on that pretty much substituted a little bit, and then you traded in that for certain money to get other things and goods and this, that, and the other, and molasses, and it all works together. But there's this ancient god too that's Absu, and people say, well, Enki became the Absu, and this is the abyss, and this has a connection to my namesake, basically, because of Neptune and its connections and how they're all written in the stars, and I'll show you that here in a minute. But in a secondary way of this tale, Absu is no longer there in Bahamut, and Bahamut gets turned into a offshoot of children that ends up coming from this idea, and that processes more. Not to go into that too deep, but in the Marduk tale, it gets changed a little bit here. And so it's still the saltwater fights the freshwater, and this is all in Tiamat's history is written in the second half of the second millennium BC in the Enuma Elish, commonly known as the Babylonian epic of creation. And these are kind of the backbone of Middle through Akkadian, all the way up into the time that we know of it referring to as Babylon, and their mythologies that were there. In fact, whenever they get captured and taken into captivity, they would have all known this. In fact, there are echoes of that in the Bible, with certain people are taken into captivity and so on, become the major astrologer there, There's also connections with dreams and what they mean and all these things too, but this is kind of the backbone. And Enuma Elish, and strangely that means when on high, or another way of saying it was like, man, when I was real high, I come up with this idea, but also an idea of, well, it's real high in the sky and people aren't even looking or thinking about it. Well, come out after dinner and I'll say the same thing to you and show you pictures and you'll see what it is. But her text in the first of the stories here, she's ambiguous. In fact, she's a woman, because she comes into one of the tales that talks about Muhammad and everything busting up and how we end up getting the moon. Well, she comes into a dinner party here, and this kind of fueled some of Sitchin's ways of talking about it with the 12th planet and everything like that, but our 10th planet. But she comes around the party here, and of course you would meet people in order somewhat, and like you do today whenever you have some procession with some queen or whatever, RIP. And they go past on and this, that, and the other, and so on through. And a lot of people have realized now that they even knew, because they could see it because of lack of extra light that we have nowadays, they even saw Uranus. And that planet is not figured in the way that it all, it's the secret guy that's gone, and so on. And it only shows up certain times and things like that. Well, we realize now that's even whenever it's waning like a moon and having that appearance, it doesn't get to show up well. It only shows up a certain amount. And then they have text where it looks like they're tracking down where it should be, and there it is again. And amazingly, we found the same thing out, but we were using the rings and the far away and exactly how far they move and certain wobbles, and it seems like there's something past that, and then there it is. Whereas they probably saw it as a moving star. But in this, Tiamat's ambiguous, so she's like a woman and so on. And the way this kind of breaks down, with her being the mother of all monsters, if you want to say it that way, is Tiamat and Apsu ended up coming together. And you see to the left of Tiamat there and that branching all that. Well, that's the creatures of the primordial first time, if you will, or the primordial time where there were monsters and so on, just like the Titans. And it's kind of where that concept comes from and gets mimicked. But she has Lamu, Anshar, and Kishar. And Kishar end up having children with Ansar and Anshar, which is actually male and female forms of gods that actually form up part of the cosmos and the way that it works. And you look at a lot of these and they're talking about how come there's an air bubble here and all this other stuff that I don't really get into. But then there becomes, off of that, the major god of everything, because these are all just primordial cosmosian things, is Anu. And from Anu and his mating ends up becoming Ea, or Nidamud, that you see there. And he mates with Damkina later, and this becomes Marduk, which is just right below that, and you can't see it. But in that idea, Ea, Nidamud, well, one of his other names comes directly from it. It's Enki, and we understand about that. And Ki means the earth, and Enki means Lord of the earth. So there was a definite time whenever this was going on, and he was the Lord of the earth, before everything changes, and it ends up being Enlil, to where he made the decisions that caused the secondary flood that nobody agrees with. Are you following me? Okay, because there was a flood before that everybody knew about. So that was the one at the end of the last ice age. And they talk about how the flood comes up from below and all these different things. Well, there's part of it written in the stars. I'll show you that here in a minute. And there's going to be a part 2 on this too, and it'll be on your top left-hand corner, coming up whenever it does. But one of Enki's nomenclatures that they quite often have is something that actually comes out to I am. And so now we get to make another connection that whenever he's at the burning bush and they ask who he is and they da-da-da, and he says that, and then he goes, Ea, Asher, Ea. Well, Asherah and Ea, or Ea and Damkina got together and create Marduk, but Ea is Ea, and that just sounds pretty pat if you spell it differently or not. And then there's that point where Jesus, in front of everybody, they started talking crap, and he turns around and he goes, before your little crap that you made up out of the cosmos, I've got it written in the stars. In fact, Ea, pointing out that what their bullshit was built on these other things, and you're a liar and all this other stuff. People don't usually understand the way that's supposed to come out, because if they did, it'd fall all apart, because he's supposed to be based on that. Well, they're based on this other stuff that's around that in a conglomeration. So it gets pretty deep here, but you look over there at the left-hand side and you see that there's aggressive demons, snakes, raging dragons, weather demons, lion men, hairy hero men, which have to do with the sun, giant serpents, fish men, lion men, bull men, and dragons. And of course, this is men of old, men of well-renowned, and they were giants, titans. Titan means that. The Titanic is something that's huge, and that still has the idea of Tiamat in it. And you don't think it's in your Bible, but whenever it first starts out in the ancient Hebrew, in its first origins, they tell you that the world was Tohu and Bohu. What is that? Well, they act like it's null and void, and they built it into their language of it, but it actually was Tiamat and Bahamut. Oh yeah, a lot of people have made these connections now once this all came out. But it didn't come out until like the 50s, where they finally got these tablets and stuff. And there are guys that whenever they were first doing it, whenever they found the Noah's Ark story, were like, oh man. And the dude literally went through one of those eureka moments and freaked out. Wouldn't you, if you found the origin of something like that and then realized the truth of it all, and that like nobody believes or thinks about any of this because it's a land that people forgot somehow? Weird. So all these primordial deities, they get with each other and everything, but Tiamat and Absu is one of the things that's really happened. So the abyss of the saltwaters and the freshwaters, and they are produced by those two. So in this idea, if she's supposed to be a dragon or a mother dragon, it is Mother Earth, and that kind of idea that begot down to these people that created mankind in their story. And it's what's stolen and taken to your Bible, and they left out a lot. It was in the other story, but it's got a web or a network that hooks it to it. Shows you that, well, did everybody come from dragons? I know I beat you over the head with dragons and ideas, but this is what's shown right here. But it's the idea that they took astral star charts and the way everything works out. You know, what's funny is that is kind of science and the way it works out, because there was these dinosaurs and everything, and then there was this other primordial people and stuff going on, and the planet got its crap together, and then we formed, and we don't know what happened, but we've got an idea of a little bit before this great flood that happened at the end of the last ice age, and then here we are now with these stories off of it, and now, well, we turned it into a story where it wasn't going to happen again, and then I'll be damned if they didn't flood us out, the people that had the story. So the gods forsake them, you know, kind of like Jesus or whatever you want to go with, but it's there. And of course, Nidamud, and this has to do things. Well, Ea was the champion among his fathers whenever it happened, and this is the original of the story. And of course, the son takes over for the father and does certain things, and they all became real scared of fighting Tiamat, and there was this great war in heaven, the thing that happened. But that's the reason it's all cool now, guys, is because all this went over and we got it all figured out now. Of course, the dragons of old, it would have been the dinosaurs, is so far removed it doesn't make that. But hey, it's a shot at it. But then they show that the Earth is at least 432,000 years old, which is sacred geometry. But then again, that's a whole lot more than just, around about 6,000 years ago, all this stuff popped up like popcorn, like is the current belief system. I don't know if anybody that's ever seen a show with a fossil on it could come out of it unless they have a delusional point at the way things all work out. But then lo and behold, this all happens again, and this trickery and mischief God comes on, and this idea working together, and these creatures all lived, by the way, in the belly of Tiamat. Okay? And remember the story about whenever he's on Eden and he eats the sacred plants and they try to make him throw up and all that? That gets re-echoed here in an idea that the idea is what's going to happen is make them all cough them all up. And by cough them all up, they're going to belch out these people and everything, and then they're going to do what they wanted to do. Does that sound anything like Zeus and how he ate these rocks and all these things and then moved out everybody and so on? And then, this goddess just comes out of his forehead one day in Athena. And this is actually based on a lot of things that are out of here and sacred geometry and zodiacal signs and astrotheology and stuff. And I'm going to go in deeper on that here soon to show you these concepts. But so this Marduk ends up coming to an idea, and if you see him here in the corner, he's got a raven hooked up to him and everything. It looks very Odin-like. May have in one source or another lost an eye in this type of battle, but they're talking to each other about how the children are suggesting that they be killed and certain gods be killed off or just set aside and do things like that, and then they don't like it. And there's this whole theogony that comes out of this idea too, which is it's a different thing. This is the time of the Akkadians and so on, well past Sumer having happened, but taking from what they had and applying it towards what goes now on another flip. And of course Marduk is hooked up to Jupiter, and of course Jupiter's Zeus and so on like that. So it's this echo, and I keep telling you the Greeks didn't just come out of nowhere. Well, other people had this same thing going on. Yeah, if you look up my series on storm gods, everybody flipped about the same times with this storm god concept on how he has the lightning and he does this controlling and he makes the storms and thunder, and that goes a lot more with agriculture than this other thing. So they kind of leaned that way. So, Apsu wanted to do one thing and be more lenient. And this is something that Apsu ignored. And this is echoing the idea whenever Enlil was just annoyed by people making noise to where he turned around and killed everybody. That's just a different way of telling, that everything went kind of bad. So God decided to throw a couple people in a boat and kill everybody else off. It's weird about that story. Now, if you look at the archaeology, nobody else had a hiccup right now, but there's even a silt layer that happened in Mesopotamia at this time, and their tales on the tablet tell you it was a local flood, but it did kill off everybody. You got 18 cubits deep and everything. Oh, that's what it says in the Bible, but then it says over the hills. Yeah. Anyhow, but the other story tells you how it come up from below and so on, and there can be a backflowing in of salt. And of course, if you get salt on there, like they talked about in North Africa and so on and other stories, you can't really grow stuff on it. It salinifies the soil, and that makes it unusable, and there becomes a real problem with that. So he ends up having his own son Marduk come in, and he's the strongest yet of the god. He's the big one. He's gifted with everything. And just like the stories that you end up finding in Perseus, where he's gifted these one certain things that make it to where he can exactly go through the thing, how it works out right. This story is taken from this idea too, and it's written in the stars just like the Perseus and Pegasus and Medusa. The whole idea comes out of, which I show in other videos, but he stirs up a wave to flood out Tiamat's womb here, almost like Ducha or whatever, and lo and behold, in a colossal act of retaliation by revenge or an insult, depending on that, Tiamat births 11 monsters into the world. A girl there made an army, ones with sharp teeth and poison to them, and some are regular dragons, and other ones are fierce if you looked at it, and then demons upon the earth, and all of these things. So this is that Pandora situation again, or it can be echoed quite a few other ways. But this is also just a way to explain why there would be something out there that wasn't just all coexistive, but attackative, like the lion men and things like that, or horsemen and centaurs and all of this type of thing. But there's a distinction between each one of these and stuff, and this is actually trying to pinpoint a lot of the monsters that are seen in the zodiac, whether it's hairy hero men, or the scorpion men, or the fish men, or the bull men, and even the fantastically ambiguous, aggressive demons. Like, what does that mean? Well, we get all these different ideas. In fact, we've got mythology and stuff that all goes down to this. This just looks very much like the Balrog situation to me, but it's not what it's trying to portray. So, a bit panicked by all of these influx of it, the gods end up granting him with the power to do everything. And if you look at the story, he says, I'll be the king over all of y'all, and y'all aren't going to give me any BS about it. And we're going to come with a new understanding in a council here situation. And everybody agrees to that. And that's the idea of the Elohim and the council, and that El's the head of one thing, but then that's plural, and it shows you that there are other gods. Well, they keep telling him to quit worshiping other gods, and I don't know if you noticed or not, that's a sign that they were. But then they give him all of these gifts. He gives him a secret scepter, a bow that does certain things, and so on, and the staff and everything. And so this is him effectively getting the king symbology in situations like that, and if he can pull it off. Now we're going to go into part 2 here, guys, and so look up in your top left-hand corner, and we're at this magic moment, we'll go ahead and go to it, and I'll start the next one without an intro. Top left. See you there.